British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the UK will recognise the State of Palestine in September unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire in Gaza, among other conditions. Starmer is facing growing pressure from Parliament, the public and his own Labour Party over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. His announcement coincides with the release of a UN-backed report that has found mounting evidence of famine and widespread starvation in the enclave.
Images of starving people in Gaza desperately seeking food and often being killed or wounded by fire from Israeli soldiers has led to worldwide horror over Israel's war to eliminate Hamas. Now the UK says it will recognise Palestinian statehood as pressure grows on Israel to end the war.
I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
Starmer's statement follows public protests over the plight of Palestinians and increasing pressure from within Parliament and his own Labour Party, including cabinet ministers. It comes after President Emmanuel Macron announced last week that France would formally recognise Palestine.
I believe it is important to unite our voices in Paris, in London and everywhere else to recognise a Palestinian state and initiate this political dynamic, which is the only hope for peace.
Starmer's announcement was welcomed in the West Bank.
We believe that this announcement and the recognition of UK of the State of Palestine will bring justice and peace for the region.
Israel's reaction was swift. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned it as a reward for Hamas's monstrous terrorism. US President Donald Trump took a more relaxed line. Flying back from a 5-day visit to his Scottish golf course where he met Starmer, Trump told reporters,
"You could make the case that you're rewarding people, that you're rewarding Hamas if you do that, and I don't think they should be rewarded. So I'm not in that camp, to be honest."
As international aid begins to trickle back into Gaza, including airdrops the UK helped to organise, the daily battle to find food leaves Palestinian recognition a distant concept.
Let's bring in Karim El-Gawari, a journalist based in Cairo. Karim, what's the reaction in the region been to Starmer's announcement?
Well, it's welcomed as a really dramatic, massive diplomatic step. Of course, there's also some questions why there are still conditions linked to it. But overall, of course, it's welcomed. Of course, when you listen to discussions here and when you go to social media in the Arab world, there is a lot of talk about really demanding more, saying that this is not enough, that there need to be concrete sanctions against Israel, like an arms embargo. And for example, when it comes to the EU, that the EU-Israeli association agreement should be suspended. It said that at least if there's no sanctions against Israel, the privileges Israel in the EU has should be taken away. So all over, it's welcomed, but of course, people here expect more.
They expect more? Just give our viewers a sense of how countries in the region feel about a two-state solution.
Well, the two-state solution really is official policy by the Arab world since the Saudi Land for Peace initiative in 2002. Land, that means the end of occupation for peace with the entire Arab world. That was an initiative that was then taken on by the Arab League and is since then official policy. So in this sense, there's nothing new. Of course, now also here right now, there's a lot of emphasis on getting humanitarian aid in and to come to broker a kind of lasting ceasefire. There is no concrete commitments by the Arab states about what role they would play in a post-war Gaza, because everyone is looking like how it's going to look like. Nobody wants to have a role in the framework of the Israeli occupation in Gaza. So Egypt and the EU and the Arab Emirates are saying they might play a role, but only if there is a political solution on the horizon.
Yeah. Meanwhile, of course, while we're talking about all of this, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues. What can you tell us about aid deliveries into Gaza? Have they been picking up?
Well, yes. I mean, relief organizations here, Red Cross, Red Crescent, and also the UN organizations are working hard to get aid in since 2 days. To a limited extent, they're successful trucks coming in, but not to the extent that is really needed. It's still not enough. And they're saying there's a lot of problems also. It's not about only getting the trucks in. It's then like, is the situation safe enough to get the trucks, access the trucks on the other side? Is there a safe route they can use? The problem of looting, of course, the situation is so terrible in Gaza that lots of trucks are looted before they even reach the destinations. So there is some relief, there is some hope that they can get more aid in the next days, because it's now only for 1 week Israel gave the relief organizations. So we will see how this continues. So somebody said there's a silver lining on the horizon, but the problem is far, far, far from being solved.
That's journalist Karim El-Gawari in Cairo. Thanks so much, Karim.
You're welcome.
And we can now speak to Nomi Bar-Yaacov. She's an international lawyer and mediator with a career spanning 3 decades in conflict management and peace negotiations. Nomi, welcome to DW. It's great to have you on the show. Now, what do you make of Keir Starmer's announcement, especially the either-or approach he's chosen?
Thank you very much, Nicole, for having me on your show. I don't think it's an either-or. I think it's a pressure point. I think he's trying to exercise pressure on the Israeli government led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a very extreme, fanatic, messianic government that would like to not only annex Gaza and populate it with Israeli Jews, but also annex the West Bank. So he's making a statement here. He's saying, this is Palestinian land. Palestinians have a right to a sovereign state, independent, contiguous, and rather than allowing you to continue with your messianic mission to ethnically cleanse Gaza and the West Bank, we're going to do reverse engineering here. We're going to start with the end game. Final status talks, Palestinian state was meant to be the end of the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords were signed in 1993, and the plan was for there to be a Palestinian state by 1998, a 5-year plan. For various reasons we don't necessarily have the time to go into, that didn't happen, and matters got far worse for the Palestinians. So yes, he's making a statement, and he's following President Macron of France and over 150 states all around the world. It is aimed to put pressure on the Israeli government.
Yeah, Israel, of course, not only rejects these accusations of ethnic cleansing that you mentioned, they also reject this move by Keir Starmer and the move we saw by Emmanuel Macron earlier this week as appeasement of terrorists. We heard Donald Trump there say this rewards Hamas in a sense. Can you give us an idea of what you think is being discussed behind closed doors among Netanyahu's government right now? How much pressure are they really under at the moment?
Well, Netanyahu's government's gone into recess, and that's part of the issue. They've gone into recess until late October, after the Jewish high holidays. So it really is talking to Netanyahu himself. It's well known that he's against the Palestinian state. He's said it many times. And what is missing, there are a number of things missing from the statement, and the statement is conditional. But I think behind closed doors, it's very clear that the 50 Israeli hostages, among them 20 believed to be still alive, will have to be released. There'll have to be a ceasefire. I mean, a ceasefire means an Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and the flooding of humanitarian aid into the Strip. You know, there's trickle aid coming through, and there's very serious malnutrition, and there's in some areas famine. So babies are dying, they're dying in the womb, they're dying as they're born. Hamas has already stated that it will not be a part of the transitional technocratic Palestinian government post-war. But there is a missing piece here. The Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, has not appointed the technocratic leader of this transitional Palestinian technocratic government. And that has to happen. So a lot needs to happen. In order for Hamas to disarm, in order for Hamas to transfer authority, the Palestinian Authority, it is their responsibility, has to appoint a technocratic government, and that has not been done. And that discussion, if you're asking what's happening behind the scenes in Israel, I mean, in Israel, what's happening behind the scenes is just, they're just becoming more and more antagonistic towards the West and more isolated, and they live in a thicker and thicker bubble. But what is happening in terms of pressure on the Palestinian government is to get their act together. And 18 Palestinian groups have already agreed to this transitional phase, which is critical. You cannot really move to an end of war if you don't know what's happening thereafter, the day after. And the Palestinian state, of course, it's a declaration of a state, but the exact borders need to be defined because, as you know, there are lots of settlements all over the place. So the question is, there going to be an exchange of land, 1-to-1? The 1967 lines the green line will be the baseline. But again, there's a lot of work to be done. And first and foremost, the Gaza Strip needs to be flooded by aid, and there has to be a ceasefire, and all 50 hostages need to be released in one go, because the
sorry to jump in there, but international recognition of Palestinian statehood is one thing, but if Israel does that change anything on the ground for the people in Gaza, for the people in the West Bank?
That's an excellent question. So it doesn't change anything immediately, but it gives the Palestinians a much higher stake in negotiations, because when you're negotiating state versus state, it's not the same as negotiating between a state and an unrecognized state and a state that is just an entity. So, I remember the days when the PLO had just an observer status in the UN. It's a question, and now the vast majority of the states in the world recognize Palestine as a state, and it will give them a stronger hold in negotiations. But that said, I'm talking about the Palestinian Authority, but that said, they really need to resolve the issue of what happens in Gaza post-war, because once there's a ceasefire, who's going to govern Gaza during the ceasefire? Hamas doesn't have control of the entire strip, and Hamas is on its way out. So the question is, how is the Gaza Strip going to be managed now during the period that aid is going to flood, hopefully, the strip? We can see now that aid trucks are being looted. There is no control over the strip. Those issues are absolutely key to be resolved in the coming 6 weeks if a Palestinian state is going to be declared by the UK, France, and presumably other Western states will join that in the United Nations in September.
You almost said the United States there, and I do want to look at their role in all of this. If they don't recognize a Palestinian state, and it doesn't look like they're about to do that, Germany too says the Palestinian statehood would be the outcome of a peace process. So where does this lead? Is this all just symbolic at this point, when the nations that could exert considerable pressure, and I'm looking at the U.S. here, of course, on the Israeli government to make a move in the direction of talks for more lasting peace, talks on a ceasefire, are not on board with this approach?
So the US at the moment is not on board with this approach, but the Gulf states that have leverage over the US, Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where they're very big business deals that the US President Donald Trump is interested in, they are all very keen for there to be a Palestinian state, and they're keen to have normalization on condition that there will be a Palestinian state. So for them, it's very clear that the end game is going to be a Palestinian state and big business deals with the US. So there's a lot that they can do, and they are doing behind the scenes. And the US approach, is unlikely that they will declare Palestinian state, but the question is whether they will obstruct it. What is clear is that this current Israeli government is marching very quickly to try to settle both Gaza and the West Bank, and that is why the statement is very significant at this time. It's basically a warning to the Israeli government that if they go ahead with the plans to evacuate more Palestinians, both from Gaza and the West Bank, the UK won't tolerate it.
That was Nomi Bar-Yaacov, expert in conflict management and peace negotiations. Pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure.